We're going to start the second session of the day, and the title is Kidnapping the Dynamics in the U.S.-Mexico border. And I want to say thank you to Nick Natividad for sharing the session. Hello, Nick. Thank you for coming. And we're going to have three presentations. Jeremy Slack, Connor Riley, and Zulia Orozco are going to be the presenters. So now, back to you, Nick.
Great, thank you so much. So my name is Nick Natividad. I'm with New Mexico State University in the Department of Criminal Justice, and I'm honored to be here to chair this session on kidnapping dynamics in the U.S.-Mexico borderlands, as Camilo had said. So we're going to get started. I have Jeremy Slack to my right, as well as Connor O'Reilly and Camilo Gomez, and the last presentation will be by Zulia Reynoso. So let's get started with Jeremy Slack, who'll be talking about Beyond the Ransom Narrative, Migrant, and Deportee Kidnapping in Mexico.
Happens all the time. No, don't worry. Can somebody get my PowerPoint up? Sure. I changed my topic quite a bit from what I had originally thought I was going to do. I don't know. I felt like doing something a little bit newer from the book that I have coming out, especially since I feel like a lot of people have probably already read some of the stuff on migrant kidnapping. And you know, a lot of this conversation comes out of that study, which was to do a quantitative post-deportation survey with people about their experiences crossing and being apprehended and returned, and asking about kidnapping. And we found about 68% of people no one requested ransom, right? And of those people that ransom was requested of, only a little over half actually paid it, right? So we saw a significant amount of people either escaping or having some weird amount of being let go, which, as well as, you know, witnessing a lot of murders. So this kind of speaks to a couple things, mainly that there's more complicated stuff going on here, and I'm not going to mention all of it. What I really want to talk about today is the levantón, right? So this idea that's become common in Mexico of a kidnapping with no ransom or no intent to return someone. And so I really am kind of urging people here to think about kidnapping not just in the taking of someone, but also in the removing of someone, right? Removing someone from social life, removing someone from their family and kind of the broader social fabric in which they exist, right? So I'm going to start with some field notes. This is from 2012. So we walked into the Procuraduría General de Justicia del Estado in Hermosillo, Sonora. It was packed and sweaty with industrial fans churning away loudly as people waited agonizingly in folding chairs packed into the lobby. We went straight to the front desk where people were taking numbers. I want to check on the status of a case, said Victoria Cuevas. When prompted by the clerk about the nature of the case, she responded emphatically, "Desaparición de mi papá." So my father's disappearance. The clerk tensed up and busied herself with the computer. Nothing. They sent us upstairs and then to another police station. She's nervous, picking at the peach-colored fingernail polish of her freshly painted nails. After hours of searching from office to office and station to station, we found the appropriate building near Victoria's former home, only a few blocks from where he was abducted. It was a tiny station with a waiting room and 2 adjacent offices, but no one to talk to. A man with slick back hair, an ostentatious silk shirt, and a Cartier watch came to the desk and asked if we had been helped. Victoria handed him a crumpled piece of paper where she had written her father's name and dates of birth. I want to check on my status of my father's disappearance. The official looked at the paper intensely for a minute, as if it contained some secret clues, and then asked us to follow him back to his office. He asked a few more questions about who made the denuncia, the police report, her relationship to the victim, and began to check the database. When he could not find anything, he invited a colleague to help him. And after a futile search through the database on an outdated computer, they could not find anything that even remotely matched or any combination of his name, circumstances. So we left unceremoniously. When she got to the car, she began to cry. So there's no record of him. So this Kafkaesque bureaucracy in Mexico's legal and policing institutions is further exacerbated by the physical danger of negotiating these spaces. Simply by making inquiries, one is exposing oneself to retribution. Organized crime in the area actively seeks out people who go to the police, file reports, known as demandas, denuncias, largely due to Mexico's legal system where these statements are sufficient to send someone to jail. It's well known that organized crime has long infiltrated police departments or vice versa in order to better receive this information and intimidate the making of reports, keeping tabs on rival criminals, or even hire police officers to do the actual kidnapping. The invisibility of death occurs from the official state side as well as through the murky, tangentially connected world of illicit organizations. Records, data, and information are inaccessible and generally fragmented through the same accusations of guilty victims that reify the social stigma for anyone searching for answers. The same logic of silence, invisibility, and fear nurtures corruption and the criminal organizations themselves. This system has created a deadly cycle, one that has made it harder and harder to find the truth. This adds another layer to the discourse of guilty victims that is constantly paraded forth by government officials. The disappearance of loved ones has a profound consequences for grief and mourning, since people must hide the emotional consequences of losing loved ones in order to avoid physical danger as well as social stigma to violent death in Mexico that's attached to it. So Paulina Boss has dubbed this ambiguous loss. Studied how the lack of finality, the questions about what happened and why, as well as the absence of a ritual for mourning, cause intense suffering for families. According to Boss, the greater the ambiguity surrounding one's loss, the more difficult it is to master it, and the greater one's depression, anxiety, and family conflict. This can have a number of outcomes. Some people react with absolute certainty, denying death or trauma, pretending it never happened. For others, it leads to a failure to reorganize their lives to accommodate this loss, especially as it relates to changing economic realities. Moreover, by denying the symbolic ritual of death, such as funerals, it compounds the social isolation of that loss. Friends and extended family often disappear or do not know how to support the loss of someone who may or may not be dead. This has devastating impacts on people's ability to return to a normal life and completely destroys social circles for the loved ones of the disappeared. It's therefore important that we try to understand death and disappearance not only as a numerical calculation of bodies, but also the social and psychic holes left by those absences. The Cuevas family demonstrates the contours of these traumas in search for their father. He was kidnapped and disappeared, and which led them all to relocate to the United States. So again, this lack of mobility often replays mobility in other ways and causes people to flee. So in October 2008 was when the kidnapping happened, and Maria, the oldest daughter, was at home and describes this ringing in her ears, not believing what's happening. She was at home when it happened. Her father had to run to the car and sped down the street. He was stopped a block away, and young armed men had taken him out of the car and loaded him into the trunk. He struggled. The Nissan Maxima was covered in blood. The police took it and never returned it. And it came out later. Later they learned that their father had received a phone call telling him to leave. When Mom called us, she told us to sit down, that he had been kidnapped and is never coming back. In the days that followed, their mother told them not to talk to anyone, not to look, not to ask, pretend that he was never part of our lives. They received a ransom call but heard nothing after the initial contact. And this had become a common aspect of disappearances. This levanton, this kidnapping without an intent, often you'll see people calling and asking for a ransom once, but not necessarily following up or often checking to see if the person is actually gone. The family fled Mexico and has been trying to adapt to a new life in the United States. The ruptures and conflicts that have followed show the importance of Boss's work on ambiguous loss. The lack of finitude, the ability to remove the last scintilla of hope that accompanies the lack of a body has myriad effects on how people interpret and react to this tragedy. Cuevas' family was no different. For some, the response was absolute certainty, certainty at the point of death. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to know. They will look at us differently if people are aware of what happened. Others felt compelled to act, but balked at outright political activist participation, partly because of the tension it caused within their family. So, again in 2012 in Nogales, Sonora, I also accompanied Victoria to meet her paternal grandmother in Nogales to conduct an interview and see if there was any new information. Victoria's grandmother, Imelda, had not been close with them growing up and had a difficult relationship with Victoria's mother as well. Imelda discussed hearing the news that when she got the call, she was dropping off someone at kindergarten and couldn't understand through the street noise, but collapsed upon hearing the news. In the days following, men carrying automatic weapons, wearing masks, arrived at her house and made them wait in the living room while they searched the house. The fact that people were actively searching for her father excited Victoria. If they are searching, then they would know if he's alive or not. Two cousins and an aunt joined the conversation and brought out a bag filled with personal effects of her father, straps of paper for farming materials, land in Chiapas, things that she didn't know about, which led to a number of uncomfortable conversations and intimate details that she didn't know. This left her sad and angry and rejecting the whole experience, saying that they didn't actually know her father, they were never there with her growing up. And her family was extremely angry at her for this, saying, you know, they worship the Santa Muerte, those people are involved with drugs, how could you have gone there? You put yourself in a lot of danger. But this paralysis adds another level of complexity, again, to notions of grief in the context of levantones and disappearances. These divisions, motivated by self or social preservation, in light of an overwhelmingly oppressive and dangerous regime, threatened to divide a family that was already suffering from isolation, grief, and fear as they relocated to a new country. These differences in how people react to the physical absence of the person are key in understanding Boss's concepts here. The inability to locate the physical body necessitates understanding the psychic geography of loss, trauma, and suffering. The physical absence but psychological presence creates this rupture. Erasing, removing, and disposing of bodies in order to silence people and sow distrust among the population as a whole, leading to greater power, control, and corruption within Mexico, especially as people struggle to conceptualize violence, often unaware of the costs inflicted on their friends and neighbors simply because people don't talk about it. So Judith Butler also argues that we interpret mourning as a finite period, that loss somehow disappears after time, negating the fact that loss fundamentally changes us. We're no longer the same self, and it's these relations that constitute us, and the loss of these ties fundamentally alter us. In the case of a loss that has no end, this is doubly true. Since there is no body to burial, no ritual to mourn, the lack of official mourning period, you know, as we often conceptualize it, has an even deeper experience. So we do not know or cannot define what is even being mourned. So this lack of symbolic rituals exacerbates the problem, and for the Cuevas family, this was readily apparent. They had a misa, but only a few of their friends came. Some of their closest friends, people I'd known since I was a child, did not say anything to me. I remember later, after one of my friends' grandmothers died, all my friends were worried about mentioning going out and partying in front of her as a show of respect. And that same girl got mad at me for not showing at her party the week my father was kidnapped. This lack of support causes ruptures in social networks. When your best friend just tells you to get over it already, you can't look at them the same way. This lack of formal recognition of loss, breaking away from social facts that govern grief, necessitates a different space for mourning. And this happens in a similar way to all grief, through dreams. And for the Cuevas family, dreaming became a principal site of resolution. So these are dreams that answer the questions of how their father died, thinking through different scenarios. Dreams is at peace or suffering, sometimes causing fights about why one sister would have dreams and not the other, right? Becoming this way of dealing with those lingering doubts and fears. And I think that lack of resolution has become kind of omnipresent in the psyche right now, and especially with this idea of the term amanecer muerto, right? Literally waking up dead, becoming common. This mundane character of violence, omnipresent death, murder without murderers, points to the fact that homicide is not considered something that's actually done, but rather a passive event. It becomes increasingly common to ask, ¿Cuántos amanecieron muertos hoy? How many died today, woke up dead today? A 15-year-old veteran of the police remembers when people would get excited if there was a dead body. People would say, a body, what happened, where? Let's go, but now no one cares, it happens every day. Another local business owner being extorted told me that he will not report the true identity of the people threatening him because if I say anything, I'll wake up dead. This case, like so many others, spurred migration to the United States, connecting kidnapping and immobility yet again to movement, as people flee to leave in an attempt to either escape the stigma of kidnapping and the potential danger it holds, but also to start over, right? To sort of put some sort of finality by moving away out of those spaces, right? And luckily, 2 of the daughters were born in the United States, but the other one wasn't, and she soon became undocumented when her tourist visa applied. You know, this is certainly a case of people that had more resources than most to cross the border, but even in that situation, it compounds with new social realities in a new economic context. And you know, this is just one case of about the 40,000 people who have suffered similar fates in Mexico, which really leaves people searching in silence. And we really need to also combine the number of disappeared with the number of bodies that have been unidentified. And I think one of the main questions that I worked on in my book, with no answer, mind you, is how do we understand deaths related to migration and mobility intertwined with deaths related to some sort of drug conflict, right? Going through and classifying and figuring out the people that are in the clandestine graves, if they're migrants, if they're deportees, where they came from, what drove them through these places, versus other types of individuals. And so in those graves, they're filled with people who were involved with drug trafficking, people who are bystanders, and people attempting to pass through those regions, right? And I don't think that we have anywhere close to having a grasp on disentangling migration-related deaths from the broader conflict in the Mexican context. But yeah, thank you very much for listening. This is a latter part of the book, which should be out in July. It's out right now, I think. I haven't gotten a copy. All the journalists on the list got a copy. But if you sign up for desk copies, I'm sure you can get some right away. But thank you very much for listening.